So we've talked about the fact that rational economic agents take action as long as the marginal benefits are greater than or equal to the marginal costs. And we talked about how consumers and producers both behave that way. They take action as long as what it's worth to them is more than what they have to give up. And consumers and producers be acting in their own self-interest. We put them together in a market, and the market finds its way to equilibrium, which in a competitive market is efficient. And I want to talk a little bit more about that concept of efficiency. But in order to understand better what we mean by efficiency, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit more about where the demand curve comes from, really what's underlying the demand curve. We talk about demand as how much people want to buy at every price, which is true. It says whatever the price is, how much people want to buy. So where does that come from? What determines how much you want to buy at every price? And we've talked about this some, but I just wanted to expand on a little bit. So the marginal utility is the marginal benefit to consumers of consuming another unit. And we know that utility is your happiness, satisfaction, well-being from consuming an additional unit. We can't really measure that, right? Well, there's no such thing as a util. We can't say, oh, that bagel gives me 6 units of utility. That's not measurable. So in order to sort of make this a little bit more concrete, we think about what's an additional unit of a good worth to you? Well, what is the value of that one more unit, that marginal unit? Remember, marginal, small incremental change, one more unit. What's the value of that one more unit? Well, we can measure it in a sense by saying, what are you willing to give up for it? What is it worth to you in the sense of how many dollars worth of other stuff are you willing to give up to get that bagel or take that action or whatever that unit of consumption or action is? And so as a way to sort of measure marginal utility, since we don't have utils, we say, how many dollars worth of other stuff are you willing to give up to get it? And if you're willing to give up more than you have to give up, you'll do it, right? That's where the demand curve comes from. It's a whole bunch of consumers doing exactly the same thing, acting in their own self-interest, saying, this is what it's worth to me. This is what I'm willing to pay. This is what I have to pay. And so if it's worth more to me than I have to pay, then I'll do it. So I do want to talk a little bit about marginal utility and how marginal utility behaves as we increase our consumption, as we consume more. So let's say you're consuming bagels, and the first bagel, I'm going to put a little arrow here, put it between 0 and 1, because it's saying going from having 0 bagels to having 1 bagel, making that marginal change, consuming that marginal bagel. Let's say it's worth $2 to me. I'm willing to give up $2 worth of other stuff to have that first bagel let's say in a week. You're not going to eat a whole bunch of bagels in a day. So bagels per week. What do you think happens after I've consumed 1 bagel and I'm thinking, I like a lot of variety in my consumption. So I've consumed 1 bagel, and then I'm thinking, do I want another bagel? What am I willing to give up? What do you think happens to your marginal utility, your willingness to pay for that 1 more bagel, once you've already had 1? Yeah, it's going to decrease, right? As you consume more and more of a good, let's say it drops to 150, it's still worth something to you, but not as much as that first bagel was worth. That first bagel was pretty tasty. You've already had 1 bagel, now another bagel, it's worth something, but it's worth less. And as you consume more of a good, each additional unit of the good is worth less and less and less to you, until you get to the point, maybe that 5th bagel really isn't worth anything. Like, you've already had 4 bagels this week. Oh, what are you willing to pay for that? Really nothing. I've had enough. And so as you consume more and more of a good, you become less and less willing to pay for each additional unit of the good. And we actually refer to this as the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility, because it's pretty universal. Whatever you're consuming, and your marginal utility may decrease very slowly, it may decrease very steeply, but it's saying that the more and more you consume of something, the less and less willing you are to pay for an additional unit of the good. And that's pretty universal. And so we say, if we graph that marginal utility, we could say, for the first one, I'm willing to pay $2. For the second one, I'm willing to pay $1.50. For the third one, $1. For the fourth one, 50 cents. For the fifth one, nothing. You can even imagine, that if there were a sixth bagel, it might actually give me, negative utility. It might be, I've already had 5 bagels. If you want me to eat a sixth bagel, you would have to pay me to eat that bagel. It could be. We're not really interested in that. Yes, marginal utility can go negative, but no rational consumer would pay money, give up something to consume something that actually makes them less happy. So yeah, it could go negative, but we're not. That's not ever where a rational consumer would operate. And so we've got the marginal utility curve, MU, the marginal utility, that says this is what each additional unit is worth to me. So this is the marginal willingness to pay, or the marginal benefit. You could call it all of these things. You could call it all of these things, and it shows you how much each additional unit is worth to you. So then you could say, if the price of a bagel is $1.25, if the price of a bagel is $1.25, how many bagels would this person consume? If the price of a bagel is $1.25, the first bagel is worth $2 worth of other stuff. So yeah, they'd consume that one. The second bagel is worth $1.50. They consume that one. The third bagel, they're only willing to give up $1 worth of other goods and services for it. The third bagel is no longer worth it. So if the price is $1.25, they consume the first bagel, they consume the second bagel, but they would not, they consume the first bagel, yeah, but they would not consume going from 2 to 3. That's not going to happen. So they would stop at 2 bagels. And that is all they would consume. And so you can see the marginal utility curve tells us at any price how many bagels are worth it. How many bagels have a willingness to pay more than the price you have to pay for them. If price fell, say to 75 cents, call that P1, then at a price of 75 cents, that third bagel would be worth it. And so if the price fell, I would consume more. That third bagel wasn't worth it for a price of $1.25, but it is worth it for a price of 75 cents. And so the marginal utility curve, my marginal willingness to pay curve, tells me whatever the price is, if my willingness to pay is bigger than that price, I'm going to buy it. If my willingness to pay is less than that price, I'm not going to buy it. So at any price, you just follow that over to the marginal utility curve, and it says anything with a willingness to pay greater than that price. Yes, so the marginal utility curve shows us at every price how many units have a willingness to pay greater than price. When price falls, there's more units now that have a willingness to pay greater than price, so I'll consume more. So the marginal utility curve shows me at every price how much I want to buy, because it shows me how much each unit's worth to me. And I'm going to keep buying them as long as what they're worth to me is more than what I have to give up. So the marginal utility curve, you can also think of it as the marginal willingness to pay curve, showing what each additional unit is worth, or the marginal benefit curve. You could just call it that more generically, or you could call it the individual's demand curve, because that's what it is. Right? So the demand curve shows you how much people want to buy at every price. How much people want to buy at every price is however many units have a willingness to pay greater than that price. And so that's where the demand curve comes from. And that's why we've got that downward sloping demand curve, because it's a whole bunch of people. We just add up what everybody wants in the market as a whole. It's a whole bunch of people who are experiencing diminishing marginal utility, who are experiencing as you consume more and more of a good, each additional unit, it may have positive value, but it's adding less and less to your happiness. So you're less and less willing to pay for an additional unit. And so that's how we get the downward sloping demand curve. And so that it's really useful to think about. The demand curve shows us at every price how much people want to buy, But you can look at it from the other direction now that we have this additional understanding. It's saying for any quantity, what am I willing to pay? What are people willing to pay? So the height of the demand curve you can think of as it shows us what people are willing to pay for each marginal unit. So that demand curve shows their willingness to pay. And as long as what they're willing to pay is more than what they have to pay, they're happier and they're gonna do it.